Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. One of my goals for this channel is to provide tips and advice for other aspiring authors, and I figured there's no better way to start that than to just simply talk about how to get started writing a book. This video is for anyone who is having trouble figuring out where to start or how to start, or maybe need some ideas to continue making progress past the first few chapters of a book. I'm going to share some tips that have worked for me over the past several years that I hope will also work for you. So let's say you want to write a book, or a novella or a short story, or maybe even a poem or a script or a song. Of course, I really don't know how helpful I would be with those last three. Since my main writing experience is with novels, I'm going to position this discussion around that format, but I think the advice is somewhat applicable across other mediums. If you've decided to write a novel, chances are you have some idea of what you want to write about already. Maybe you've got some characters in mind, maybe you have a few plot points, a cool setting, maybe you have just one single concept so far that you're going to build on as you write. Maybe you have a full outline already. Regardless of your level of preparation, if you've never actually written a novel before, you might not know how to actually start getting words on the page. Or maybe you've started 5 different books already, made it a few chapters in each time, and then gave up because you realized you didn't know what you were doing. I certainly wouldn't know what that's like. In either case, you might do what anyone does in the 21st century and turn to Google, or Bing if you're that kind of person. You search for how to write a novel, and you get hundreds of articles and videos of advice. They all either say the exact same thing, or they all say 100 different things, and neither of those cases are helpful. Sometimes they make broad statements like, create a cool world, or develop interesting characters. Obviously those are things you want to do in your story, but the real question is, how do you do that? Overwhelmed, you probably decide to put your writing on hold until you feel more experienced or better prepared, and it might be years until you come back to writing. I've read and digested a bazillion pieces of writing advice over the years, and I can say that the best advice is this: don't listen to writing advice. Except for mine, of course. But what I really mean is don't listen to advice in the beginning. Don't get hung up on the writing advice. Don't try to adhere to what others are saying if it keeps you from doing the actual writing. Just start writing and don't worry about anything beyond telling your story. Realistically, your first draft does not need to have a coherent plot, fleshed out characters, or a well-developed setting. All it needs to do is exist. Trying to accomplish all of the things you see in a published novel in your first draft is going to either frustrate you so much that you give up entirely, or make you take 10 years to finish that one novel. There's nothing wrong with the latter, of course, but if you're looking to get published and possibly make a living doing so, you can't afford to fall into either of those traps. Trust me. To get back to the original point of the video, I'm going to share with you my processes for conceptualizing a book and then getting started. Now everyone has their own process and your mileage may vary depending where you fall on the pantser versus plotter scale. You may have also heard these terms as gardener and architect, or discovery writer and outliner. For a brief overview, a plotter is exactly that. It's your more traditional outliner, someone who plans out the story, possibly pretty detailed in advance, typically before starting any of the actual writing, whereas a pantser is someone who basically starts writing from a single concept and discovers the story as they go. I tend to develop a more well-defined plot structure, a moderately defined setting, and fairly light characters who I expand upon as I write, so I put myself right around the middle of that scale, leaning a little toward the plotter side, but I think there's value to be had here for anyone. Alright, so where does a novel actually begin for me? I will often have an idea of some particular image or scene floating in my head, and I will write down a general sketch and hold on to it for later. If it's something I think will work as a cool climactic moment, I will then start to work backward from that point, just jotting down whatever steps I think may be necessary to get me to that moment. And to start building a whole plot off of that, let's say I have this neat idea for the main character to fight off an assassin at the end of the book using some kind of cool aspect of the magic. Right away that prompts a few questions. First and foremost, what needs to happen to lead up to this fight? I will start with the obvious points then. If this is a one-on-one fight, the character probably needs to be somewhere secluded, and the assassin has to be able to get to them unnoticed. This also helps branch into developing a piece of your setting, because you can then think about a specific building or something as broad as like nighttime rituals in your society. I then just start asking more questions. Who is my main character? Why is someone trying to assassinate them? This character may have been causing trouble for the bad guy, and the bad guy is finally trying to remove them from the picture. And that just spawns more questions. Who's the bad guy? What nefarious plans have they been enacting? What's our character doing that the bad guy doesn't like? What does this magic look like? And on I go, just continuing to ask questions and work backwards until I've got a larger framework sketched out. Eventually, I will have built up a sequence of events and important information that I can then develop into a fuller outline. On the reverse side of things, let's say I have an idea for how to begin a story, but not how to end it. I want to show my main character in their normal world before things go crazy. The only thing I know beyond that opening is that some sort of inciting incident has to happen and the story will unfold from there. In this case, I might not have the broad scope of the conflict actually planned out, so I'll essentially play improv with myself, just continually asking, and then? With this method, I just lay out ideas that could work in some sort of sequence of events, not being too concerned about how everything connects together logically. And then once I have the skeleton framework laid out, I will then work on expanding each point to try to make it more feasible to lead into the next one. In general, I start outlining usually with some notion for the beginning, some notion for the end, so I end up working from both sides, kind of marching towards the middle to hopefully construct a coherent plotline. Neither of these methods are perfect, of course, but I think they're worth trying. This advice is hard to put into action for discovery writers, since the point of that method is to develop the story as you go without a true outline, but at the very least, this can maybe give you some tools to help you when you get stuck in your writing. I've been speaking pretty vaguely about characters and ideas here, but that's because those will be fleshed out as you actually begin developing the scope of your story. You don't need to have every single detail about your characters and your world set in stone before you start writing. And oftentimes things will change as you write, and I firmly believe you have to be open to that. As you develop as a writer, you will gain a better sense of when something is or is not working, and sometimes deviating from your outline, if you use one, can make a story better. I think it's valuable for anyone who is starting out and maybe struggling to make progress in their writing to try out both pantsing and plotting. Usually people find out pretty quickly which side they lean more heavily toward, but I don't think anyone is 100% one or the other. The most important thing to remember though is to just start writing the story you want to tell. The second most important thing is to not give up, which is something I'll talk about in another video. I hope my rambling here today has been entertaining and possibly a little informative. I've been planning to dive into more specific elements of story structure, plot, character setting, outlining, other things like that in future videos. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Leave a comment below talking about how you begin stories, or if you have questions about my writing process, or if you just want to say hello. I post videos on Sunday and Wednesday. Until next time, I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I will catch you here in the next video.